G'day folks, and welcome to this review of All Bridges Burning, Red Revolt and White Guard in Finland, 1917 to 1918. This is volume 10 in Volko Runke's coin series. This is published by GMT Games in 2020, and this volume was designed by VPJ Arponen. Now this takes us to Finland, 1917-1918, a civil crisis, a civil war emerging. There are three factions in this game, and this is the first dedicated three-player coin game. And I'll say straight off the bat, this is a great experience for three players. If you typically have three players playing your coin games, here is your solution. It works very well with three. The game presents three factions. You have the Reds, socialists, communists, red markers throughout the board. They are trying to create opposition to sort of government, white Senate government rule throughout Finland. They begin mainly down in the south. They need to hold on to their ground and eventually wage this war. They're waging war against the Senate white pieces. The Senate white are aided by Germany, Imperial Germany, and they are again waging this war against the Reds, trying to maintain control. They start mainly kind of up in the north, and they are trying to achieve victory. They're trying to gain control of the large towns on the map: Helsinki, Vilpuri, and three others. And to do so, they basically need to engage in direct conflict with Red forces by marching and attacking, raising forces, and so forth. In between these two factions are the blue moderates, and they play sort of a middle ground, a balancing force in a way. They obviously want to prevent either of the other two opponents winning, but they don't do much direct fighting. They are mainly engaging in, I guess you could say, political subterfuge. You might phrase it in that way. They're engaging in politics. They are bringing a personality out of the board. They are trying to retrieve news of terror and kind of promote this and trying to, I guess, bring the other two down. There are some interesting changes to the standard coin game sort of system in here to facilitate those three players, to enable the three-player system to work. And I'll start with the card draw system. So all coin games revolve around a deck of cards, and you'll typically have one card face up, and you'll have one card available as the next card. Now in most coin games, these will have an order of activation, and you will simply or rather the order of eligibility, and you'll follow that order. So whoever is first on that card has first option to play. Whoever is second has second option. And in most coin games, you only have two factions active and two either ineligible or unavailable to take an action. That's how most coin games work. In All Bridges Burning, there's an innovative new system of eligibility. Whoever is first eligible can look at this card and decide if they want to do a limited command, or event. And they move their little marker to that space on the board. Whoever is second eligible has to follow that direction. So, for example, the blues do a command and special. The red faction, who may be second, can do an event or a limited command following this sort of sequence of play eligibility track. That's two activations. But then, whoever is third eligible, if there is a third eligible player, they can still do an action, and they may be able to do the remaining action or pass to gain a resource. So this means that in this three-player coin game, all three factions may be eligible, and whatever the first player does sort of drives the actions available, much like other coin games. But it means that you are, with a three-player game, you are far more active than you might otherwise be in a coin game, and there is no order of eligibility icon on these cards. Rather, you just have a pretty straightforward event. As with many coin games, the events in All Bridges Burning tend to reflect the main actions that factions can perform throughout the game, but often at a cheaper cost or with an added bonus, things like that. So that you are, I will say from the outset, you have a lot of very tense and interesting decisions to make about, do you perform this action now? You know the next card coming out, so do you want to wait a little bit more? When the deck gets close to a propaganda round. I'll talk about that in a moment. The decisions become more tense. So the deck is seeded with 4 propaganda cards, roughly a quarter of the way through each, and you kind of know roughly when these are coming. They are every 6th to 10th card. They're basically 10 cards, and you know there'll be a propaganda card down the bottom, and then another 10 cards, propaganda at the bottom. These propaganda cards provide sort of an administrative phase. You do a victory condition check to see if anybody has instantly won the game. You gain new resources, and you can, well, the reds and the whites can buy support in the areas they control by spending resources. It's a bit of a administration. So as these are approaching, when you're up to the sort of 6th, 7th, 8th card in a sort of campaign, you know propaganda might be coming out soon. As soon as you see the propaganda card, the game instantly enters that administrative phase and you go through those processes. So that adds to your kind of decision making. You might want to set yourself up to buy that support during administration. The actions in the game are very similar to the actions you'll see in many other coin titles. And I'll run through these if you're not familiar with coin games. First of all, the reds and the whites can both, and the blues as well, sorry, can rally. This is where they bring new troops onto the board. There's only really one type of force, these cells, they're called. So you rally to bring more cells, more soldiers, more forces onto the board. The reds and the whites can then, once they have these cells on the board, engage in what's called activism. And this is where they inspire the people to become active, and they flip them to their active side. Now, this is quite different to most coin games. In most coin games, when you see this symbol on a cell, it means it's exposed, it's being revealed, and it's more vulnerable to attack. It's quite the opposite in All Bridges Burning. When a cell is active, it means they're enthused, and they are then able to perform special activities such as political event to raise money, or a Senate crackdown to reduce red opposition. So you actually, most sides want their cells to be active like this. The blues have some exceptions to that, which I won't go into. The reds and the whites can both engage in terror. This is basically a way to remove opponents' forces from spaces where you're active. This creates terror. It may create news, which the moderates are interested in, and it makes it more difficult. When there is terror in a space, it makes it more difficult for your opponents. So there's white terror and there's red terror. It makes it more difficult for your opponents to rally, more expensive for your opponents to rally in that space. So it's kind of a way to contest and gain sort of influence and control over a region. The victory conditions for the 3 sides, they're the 3 main actions I should point out as well. There are 2 other actions, marching and attacking, which only begin in the second phase of the game. So this game is divided into 2 phases. The first phase is really a build-up, relatively passive, quiet, build-up of forces, trying to gain control. Once there are a certain number, 27 red and white cells on the board, the game enters the second phase, and this is where the war breaks out, civil war, and the reds and the whites can begin marching and attacking each other. The victory conditions reflect the 3 different forces. So the whites, as I said, want to control at least kind of 4 cities to be in the running. There's only 5 cities on the board, so they're really fighting for these towns. The reds are trying to shift the population to opposition. They want the population to oppose the government, and as the moderates, playing this middle ground, they want to, sort of, by the end of the game, sort of increase polarization to, I guess, unsettle the population, play that middle ground, and then gain as many resources as they can. The moderates win by gaining, they score victory points. They gain a victory point margin by securing 15 or more resources. So towards the end of the game, they want to start saving their resources up, and it's quite hard to do as the moderates. It's not an easy way for them to gain those resources. So the way the game plays out is, there's this slow initial build-up. The cells gradually emerge from mainly the reds and the whites. The whites have 20 cells, the reds have 20 cells, the moderates only have 6. So as you can see here, the moderates are a relatively small force on the board. Reds and whites are trying to gain control, they're trying to gain support or opposition with the population. The moderates are trying to balance that out. So they have a political display where they can place political markers. which can help one side or the other. They basically make some adjustment costs more expensive for their opponents. They can place their cells in areas. So you can see here in Helsinki, maybe difficult to see, but the moderates have placed their cells to deny Red's control of Helsinki. So they're playing that middle ground, trying to, deny control. They're also moving their cells around to secure the news and gain resources for themselves. So it's a very interesting dynamic between the three powers, and we found it worked very well. It's each side is sort of focusing on their objective whilst trying to rein in the leader. You also have two non-player powers factions. You have the Russians, who start off on the board and they're trying to influence the outcome. They're trying to help the Reds, in effect. Russian military forces are on the board and they will benefit the Red player in some of their combats. Likewise, German forces don't start on the board, but they do come out later, mainly in 1918, the second half of the game, Phase 2, and they'll invade Finland and move mainly to attack Red forces and help out the Whites. And again, the Whites can use the Senate, I should say, they're not called Whites, they're the Senate. They can use these German troops to help them in their combat. There are some other really interesting elements in the combat sort of mechanisms here. Various events, such as this one, trains, will bring in trains or Jaegers or cannons, and they add combat modifiers. So you can see here in Tampere, the Senate, the White, have secured trains, Jaegers and cannons for a potential +4 modifier to their combat, which is quite considerable. The combat, so both the Reds and the Whites mainly are trying to secure these what are called capabilities. There are also the capacity to prepare your defences, which provides a negative or defensive modifier in combat. The combat system is beautifully simple, but provides interesting space for, tactical consideration. So you basically, when you attack, the attack kind of has the initiative. They're bringing their key forces to battle, your trains, your cannons. They add various modifiers for these kind of things. So the number of troops they have, their Jaegers, trains, cannons, potentially German or Russian forces, and the like. They subtract the defenders modifiers, which may include their prepared defences, and likewise German and Russian troops on the defence, plus Jaegers, trains, cannons, and so forth. You get a modifier, and it might be, let's say, the Whites have attacked here, they get a +4. They then simply roll a die, and they need to roll equal to or less than that number. If they roll higher, they fail the combat, nothing more happens. Their turn ends, their activation ends, that's it. There are no further consequences other than the resources they've paid for that combat and the energy they've exhausted. If they roll equal to or less than their target number, they win the combat, and they face an interesting choice here. They can either engage the enemy and eliminate or capture their forces, or they can force them to retreat. If they decide to eliminate, they basically alternate eliminate, capture among their up to that die roll value. So it's a good way to eliminate or remove enemy forces, but it creates terror and it creates news, which the moderates want to see. So if the moderates are looking strong, you may not want to go down that path. Or you can just sort of force the retreat of those enemy forces, kick them out of the space, and equal to that value, and the space is then yours. So you have this initial slow build up, as I said, in phase 1, and then phase 2, this kind of fighting starts, and there's a lot of marching and moving. Trains provide an interesting factor to consider. They enable you on the attack to move by train and attack instantly, so you can kind of get these surprise attacks going. The defender should kind of see this coming when there's a train nearby and prepare for their defense. So the kind of ebb and flow of the game is very interesting. It's very dynamic. There's a lot of interaction between the three factions. The moderates aren't quite as militarily active as the others. They're not fighting this war, but they are sort of moving throughout the board. Now, a lot of the action, because there's 5 towns, only one of them has a population of 2, which is Helsinki, and it's way down the south. The other towns are also down the south. Up in the north side of the board up here, there's just a lot of low population open space. No towns, no population in many of these areas. So there's not a lot of activity going on up here, but it's a place where the Senate, the whites, want to control and provide support because this gives them income during the production phase. So they're empty. There's not a lot of fighting going on really, unless the Reds kind of want to contest that. Most of the fighting is down in these populous areas where basically the Reds can shift opposition to help them with their victory conditions, and where the Whites need to control, the Senate rather, needs to control the towns to help with their victory conditions. And the Blues are also active down here because this is where the fighting's happening. This is where they can negate control. This is where their personality is. Yeah, that's what they're trying to do. So yeah, as a result, a lot of the activity is down here in the south. There are, because you have trains and because they move your armies, there are rail networks stretching throughout the map as well. And they're another interesting development. You can move your armies from one space to an adjacent space, but then they have to wait. And on your next activation, you can then engage in combat. Or they can use their trains to move around following this rail network, and again, use that surprise combat. Now, I mentioned the Russians and the Germans. They don't really play a major role. They're an element to consider, but all players need to be careful. There is Russian vassalage rating and a German vassalage rating. If that gets too high, it starts to upset players' victory conditions. They need to the Senate, I think, needs to keep, well, they both, the Senate and the Reds need to keep this low, else they may not be eligible for victory. And if neither player at the end of the game has surpassed their victory margin of 0, it's possible the Germans or the Russians will win. They'll basically take over and begin to dominate politics in Finland, and Finland, in effect, loses their independence. There is also, I mentioned earlier, sort of a polarization track, and this tracks the level of polarization within society, how polarized people have become, torn between sort of left and right. And this also plays into considerations in terms of how it affects victory conditions. So if, again, the Reds and the Senate Whites, if polarization is too high, they may be ineligible. I think if it's 5 or higher, they can't achieve, or their victory margin is considered 0. So that's another factor that the moderates can play with to, I guess, delegitimize Reds and Whites. At the same time, it makes certain moderate actions more expensive if it goes up too high. At the same time, it's a source of moderate income during those propaganda phases. So there's all these factors you're considering at various phases of the game. So bringing this all together, All Bridges Burning, Volume 10 in the Coin series is a wonderful 3-player experience. It is true to the spirit of the Coin series, but with a number of really unique and innovative design features to create a really different experience that captures the essence of Coin whilst giving you something else. It plays faster than most Coin games as well, which is interesting, given it's 3 players. Various reasons for this. You're doing a lot more because 3 players can potentially be active. There's more things happening. There's a smaller board area. You're really focused around those 5 towns down in the south. There are a lot of sort of rules, peculiarities, and unique elements of this game to distinguish it from other Coin titles, but there's nothing overly complicated. The moderates are probably the most difficult faction just because they're so different to the Reds and the Senate. So it's difficult for them it can be difficult for a moderate player to really find that middle road. But yeah, as I said, this plays quite quickly within, say, 2 to 3 hours for, maybe even quicker, for experienced Coin players. New players to the Coin series might be a bit slower. You get a healthy mix of combat, rallying, terror, the moderates sort of playing off the 2 factions. As I said, these military capabilities are quite fascinating. The combat system is really quick and engaging. It's interesting. As I said, the sequence of play, this order of eligibility, is another great innovation in the Coin series. So, if you're a fan of the Coin series and you're looking for a 3-player game, highly, highly recommended. This is your solution to that issue of how to play Coin with 3 players. It's perfect for 3 players. In terms of the solo gameplay, I have not played this solo, but if in terms of sort of theme and how it plays out, look, it's a coin game that plays pretty quickly. So if you want a quicker, faster playing coin game, while still having the full kind of coin experience, like I said, there are about 40 cards in the campaign deck. So you're going through a lot of cards, propaganda phase, every 10 cards. You're still getting that full coin experience. It just tends to play quicker. And that could be part of the design. It could just be that we've played so many coin games by now that things tend to move quite quickly for us. So yeah, look, check it out, folks. This is All Bridges Burning, Volume 10, published by GMT Games in 2020, designed by VPJ Arpanen. Yeah, that is All Bridges Burning. Thanks, folks, and take care.